Hi everybody, welcome to our Memorial Day Assembly. I know we're doing it a little bit differently this year on video, but I appreciate everybody's attention as we take some time to reflect and honor those who have served in our military and given their lives in the service to our country. Before the assembly gets underway, we're going to pause for the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you once again for that rendition of the national anthem. I wanted to take a moment before we start our formal assembly pieces today by describing a little bit of the history and importance that goes with Memorial Day. For many Americans, and especially those of you who are still in school, Memorial Day can just feel like that Monday that you get off in May that sort of kicks off the start of the summer and lets us know that we're getting close to the end of school. The reality is that Memorial Day stands for a lot more than that, a whole lot more than that. Memorial Day's origins come from all the way back in the post-Civil War era, and the holiday was first known as Decoration Day. Over time, as America engaged in more conflicts and the number of veterans who had served and given their lives in service to the country began to increase with each war, eventually the federal government took some steps to create a formal celebration day, which in 1971 became known as Memorial Day. Since then, Americans across the country have been asked to pause from their daily lives of work and school to take some time to reflect on those who have served and given their lives and to honor that sacrifice. We ask all of you today to take some time in reflection with us, as well as our guest speakers, for that exact purpose, to appreciate, honor, and reflect on those who have given their lives in service to our country. And we challenge you as well on Monday, instead of taking the time simply to enjoy the day off, which we hope you'll do, we also hope that you'll take some time in your own way with your family and friends to appreciate and thank those who have served our country, and especially those who have given their lives in service to our country. Today's remembrance will feature several components designed to help us collectively reflect and appreciate the service of our fellow Americans in conflicts throughout U.S. history. The first piece is a speech from one of our own Conant alumni, Tobias Dupuis, who served in the United States Marine Corps immediately upon graduating from Conant High School. He'll share some of his experiences of service. The second piece of today's assembly is a series of speeches put together by Mr. Love's public speaking class. Each learner chose a conflict and an individual who gave their life for that conflict and will highlight that individual in their speech to you today. Mrs. Durand will also contribute to that piece of today's assembly. Third, we will have a speech from one of our own teachers, Mr. Mcmahon, who spent time serving in the United States Army from 1980 to 1982. And lastly, we have one learner speech today for the Ralph Stratton Memorial Scholarship, focused around why I'm happy to be an American. At the conclusion of those various pieces, we'll come back together to end our assembly. Please give your full attention as we kick off with our first speaker today.
Hi, my name is Tobias Dupuis, and I'm currently active duty in the Marine Corps. I graduated from Conant in 2016 and left for boot camp soon after. I'm a helicopter crew chief by trade, a very difficult but rewarding job that's given me the opportunity to travel and do some incredible things. I've had some amazing and some not so amazing experiences, and I've gained many friends that I consider as close as brothers. Unfortunately, I've lost some brothers as well. Despite the hard times I've been through, the time I spent in the Marine Corps has taught me to embrace the suck and to lean on the Marines to my left and right and know that together we can get through anything. that no matter how bad of a day I might be having, those who came before me dealt with things much worse than I have to get our society to where it is today. I am proud to be able to serve, and even as I transition out of the Marine Corps next year and move on to other things, I know that I will always look back on my time in and be thankful for having had the opportunity to serve alongside some incredible people.
The American Revolutionary War, also known as just the Revolutionary War, is one of the most important wars in American history. If it wasn't for our people's sacrifices, our country and way of life as we know it today would be drastically different. The American Revolution is one of the biggest reasons we have liberties and freedoms we have today, and what we fought for is what makes us so different from other countries in the world. Our people gave up their lives in order for the future generations, us, to be truly independent and free from British tyranny. One of the many great people who died during the war is a naval officer named Nicholas Biddle, who died in a naval battle in 1778 fighting for the Continental Navy. On March 7, 1778, Biddle and his crew were confronted by a 64-gun, heavily armored British ship off the coast of Barbados. Instead of his crew fleeing, they fought the ship in order to protect an American merchant convoy. While engaged in the battle, Biddle's ship exploded, killing him and most of his crew of over 300 sailors. Biddle's body was lost at sea and never found. The United States Navy has named 4 ships USS Biddle in his honor.
It all started with the United States had a variety of grievances against Britain. Many felt that the British had not yet come to respect the United States as an actual country. The British were impressing, or American sailors at sea, as well as blocking American trade with France. Both of these were spillover policies from the British prosecution of the war with France. The British were also unsubtly supporting Native American settlers who were in conflict with American settlers along the frontier. Zebulun Pike was born on January 5, 1779, and lived on as an American brigadier general until he died April 27, 1813, by flying rocks and other debris, and was buried at the military cemetery. Pike and General Jacob Brown departed from the military outpost of Sackett Harbor for what became his last military campaign. On this expedition, Pike commanded combat troops in the successful attack on York in April 1813. After the passing of Zebulun Pike, he was celebrated with biographies, memorials, paintings, poems, and songs. He also became the namesake for dozens of towns, counties, and ships. In 1901, Pike was honored with a marble statue and was later honored with a bronze medallion portrait.
The Mexican-American War, also known as just the Mexican War, is one of the least known wars in American history. It primarily revolved around America's expansion into modern-day Texas and other Spanish territories at the time. The war itself lasted from 1846 to 1848 and, as wars go, recorded a relatively low number of deaths, around 1,700 from actual warfare. More than 10,000 died from other causes, such as diseases. One of the most important and early battles was the Battle of Palo Alto in modern-day Texas, near Brownsville. Though casualties were low, America lost a great officer named Major Samuel Ringgold. He was known for developing what was called flying artillery, which involved using artillery that could be easily moved from place to place. He was mortally wounded by cannon fire that mangled the lower half of his body. He refused to leave the site of the battle before his men, and before the battle was officially over. He died 3 days later. He has been commemorated with songs, poetry, and plays due to his bravery and ability to boost morale. A county, a national fort, and several American cities are named in his honor.
The Civil War was the deadliest war in the USA for the reason that both opposing sides were American. An estimated 620 to 750,000 Americans passed away throughout the 4-year-long war. The war occurred mainly because the Confederate States did not support the ban of slavery, and so they left the Union. The Terrell brothers are well known throughout history because they were one of the few family members to enter the war on opposing sides. Before entering the war, William Rufus Terrell graduated from the United States Military Academy near the top of his class at 16th place. After completing the academy, he quickly became a general in the Union to take action against slavery during the Civil War. His brother James Terrell stood on the side of the Confederacy in protest against the slavery ban. He and his brother had both fought and commanded in the brigade. During the war, both James and William had been killed. William's date of death had been October 8th, 1862, and James' date of death was May 30th, 1864.
The Spanish-American War was a fast but brutal one. While the war only lasted around 8 months, over 16,000 people died in it. While most of this was due to disease and famine from the war, around 1,500 of the deaths was a direct result from combat. One of the brave men who died in this war was William Lambert, and he was a fireman, second class for the USS Maine, the ship that was said to have kicked off the war with its sinking. He was also a pitcher on the ship's baseball team. He was the only African American on the team and was known for his heat seeker of a pitch. They had beaten the other baseball teams in the Army and were actually on their way to go against an all-star team in Cuba. Unfortunately, he would never see that game. So on February 15th, in 1898, William Lambert sadly was among the crew members lost within the explosion of the USS Maine. While he didn't see any combat, we should all honor his sacrifice and the opportunities it indirectly gave us. He was a very accomplished man who got to be a firefighter, soldier, and baseball player in his short life.
World War I started from the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary. When war started to break out in Europe in 1914, President Wilson declared that the United States would follow a strict policy of neutrality that would not maintain this stance. The war lasted from 1914 to 1918. The total amount of deaths from all causes is 876,000. It was estimated over 11,000 soldiers on all sides were killed, wounded, or were missing on the final day of the war. The total number of dead soldiers from the United States are 117,000, and we didn't even join the war until 1917. One of our soldiers who died in the war was a man named Henry Nicholas John Gunther. He was an American soldier and likely the last soldier of any of the belligerents to be killed during World War I. He was killed at 10:59 a.m. The German soldiers were already aware of the armistice that would take effect in 1 minute. They tried to wave Gunther away, but he kept going and fired a shot or two. When he got too close to the machine guns, he was shot with a burst of an automatic fire and killed instantly. Gunther has been known as the last American to get killed in World War I. We have buried him in the Most Holy Redeemer Cemetery in Baltimore, Maryland, in his honor.
Charlie Havlat was born on November 10, 1910 in Dorchester, Nebraska to Czechoslovakian immigrants. Havlat was drafted into the U.S. Army in 1942 and died on May 7, 1945. In fact, he was the final American fatality of World War II. He died in combat in Europe minutes after the German officers had negotiated a ceasefire and a few hours prior to the German army's surrender. On the day of his death, Charlie and his platoon were conducting a recon mission on a dirt road in the woods when they took heavy fire from the troops of the 11th Panzer Division. The troops fired 4 Panzerfaust at the Americans' lead vehicle, which brought the Americans to a stop. Panzerfausts are inexpensive, recoilless German weapons which fired an anti-tank warhead. Havlat was in the second vehicle. He ducked behind the hood, then lifted his head to see what was happening. When he did, his forehead was struck by a German bullet, which killed him instantly. The Americans returned fire until they received word by radio that a ceasefire had come into effect only 9 minutes prior to Charlie Havlat's death. Havlat was the only fatality of this mission. He died near Valery, Czech Republic, but the exact location of his death is unclear.
The most incredible gift that you may ever receive is the gift of freedom. The path to freedom, however, did not come easily. The road to freedom included pain, suffering, and unfortunately, death. The Korean War took place from 1950 to 1953. The war was started when North Korea, along with China, invaded South Korea with plans to take control and unite the countries under totalitarian lead. The United States, acting on our containment policy, joined the war in favor of South Korea. Genevieve Smith was the only recorded Army nurse who died in the Korean War. She was transferring to her new post as chief nurse of the 8th U.S. Army when her plane crashed off the coast of Japan. She was born in Iowa, USA in 1905. She came from a small town with a small family with a big dream to become a well-respected nurse in the medical field. Every day that Genevieve Smith served, she was fighting. She fought for the soldiers' lives who fought for everything our country stands for today: life, liberty, and freedom.
The Vietnam War was also known as the Second Indochina War. It was a conflict in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia from November 1st, 1955 to the fall of Saigon on April 30th, 1975. The U.S. entered the Vietnam War as an attempt to prevent the spread of communism, but foreign policy, economic interests, national fears, and geopolitical strategies also played major roles. This war primarily took place in South Vietnam, North Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Southeast Asia. The Vietnam War lasted approximately 20 years from November 1st, 1955 to April 30th, 1975. More than 3 million people, including over 58,000 Americans, were killed in the Vietnam War. More than half the dead were Vietnamese civilians. One of the most important people in the Vietnam War was Charles Mcmahon, who was one of the last United States servicemen killed in the Vietnam War. He was killed in a rocket attack one day before the fall of Saigon. For years during the Vietnam War, the U.S. used Tan Son Nhut as a major base for airborne military operations. But this week, in 1975, it was engaged in a huge airlift, evacuating the last U.S. personnel and South Vietnamese who supported the U.S. out of Vietnam.
The Gulf War, a brutal and bloody war, started in 1990 when Iraqi forces invaded a small country in the Middle East named Kuwait due to oil prices and production disputes. Coalition forces from 35 nations led by the United States retaliated with war. The first shots were fired when the coalition forces began an aerial and naval bombardment in an attempt to expel the Iraqi forces. This assault was the first attempt of many more to follow and the start of Operation Desert Storm. On January 17, 1991, Strike Fighter Squadron 81, nicknamed the Sunliners, began their first tour to assist in the bombardment of the Iraqi forces. Michael Scott Speicher, a United States Navy pilot and member of the Sunliners, was shot down by a surface-to-air missile over an uninhabited wasteland 100 miles west of Baghdad, making him the first casualty of the Gulf War. Michael was a naval aviator, flight instructor, and a father of 2 children. He fought bravely in battle and is a soldier who deserves to be remembered.
I would like to bring our attention to one of the fallen who died in the War of Iraq. Army Sergeant Randy S. Rosenberg was born in Berlin, New Hampshire on February 17, 1980. He was raised by his grandfather. Sergeant Randy S. Rosenberg was part of the 9th Squadron in the 1st Cavalry of an all-American task force. He was killed in action when a vehicle-based improvised explosive detonated in Khalidiyah, Iraq in 2004. Sergeant Randy S. Rosenberg was one of the 4,000 deaths in the War of Iraq. Sergeant Randy S. Rosenberg died at the age of 23. He had only just started living, so let us take a second to thank him for his sacrifice.
The war in Afghanistan is a war that has been going on since 2001, when the United States and its allies invaded Afghanistan to drive the Taliban from power. This war is still going on in the present day. This war has been at great cost to many of our fellow Americans who have lost their lives and have come home in an American flag-covered casket. Their families stand on the tarmac as their casket is carried off of the plane, instead of running into their arms and welcoming them home. One of these great heroes that we lost in this war was Corporal Brandon Gamrant, who graduated from Conant High School in 2013. He was deployed shortly after with his unit as a combat engineer in the Marine Corps. He was killed in action by a roadside bombing on June 20th, 2014. Brandon was an active member in his community and school before he left for the Marine Corps. He was a member of the Temple Volunteer Fire Department, as well as an active member in the Jaffrey Bible Church. He also worked at the Touchstone Farm and Temple and at the Summerhill Retirement Center in Peterborough. Brandon will always be loved and missed by all who knew him, and we will continue to remember him and the legacy he left behind when he passed.
May is the month of spring, the month when new life in nature begins to bloom. It is also the month in which we honor those who have died in war, the fallen soldiers, on Memorial Day. Life goes on for those who were not taken, the loved ones left behind, especially the mothers. We join those mourning the dead today in deep gratitude for their own sacrifice and service in the name of freedom. This Gold Star Mother Monument is located on the Jaffrey Town Common. Built in 1949, it is dedicated to the local mothers who lost sons in World War II. And it is with our own losses in mind that I'd like to read the letter written by Abraham Lincoln to Mrs. Bixby, whose 6 sons served in the Union Army. At that time, it was believed that 5 of them were killed in battle during the Civil War. November 21st, 1864. Dear Madam, I have been shown in the files of the War Department a statement of the Adjutant General of Massachusetts that you are the mother of 5 sons who have died gloriously on the field of battle. I feel how weak and fruitless must be any word of mine which should attempt to beguile you from the grief of a loss so overwhelming. But I cannot refrain from tendering you the consolation that may be found in the thanks of the Republic they died to save. I pray that our Heavenly Father may assuage the anguish of your bereavement and leave you only the cherished memory of the loved and lost, and the solemn pride that must be yours to have laid so costly a sacrifice upon the altar of freedom. Yours very sincerely and respectfully, A. Lincoln.
Memorial Day is the whole reason I went in the service. I come from a line of veterans. My dad, Korean War vet, and all through my upbringing with the town I grew up in, a lot of the neighborhood kids joined and were drafted into the Vietnam War. So I'm from the era where, when I was a kid, Vietnam was going on, and so there was a lot of folks being drafted to go into the service and to go to fight in Vietnam. And unfortunately, in our neighborhood, a lot of them didn't come back alive, and they came back and we had funerals. So Memorial Day does have a special feeling for me when I think about those guys that left the neighborhood and didn't come back alive. So growing up during Vietnam, each night the daily news would be on, and we'd hear lists of names being read of those that died during the day, and the numbers were pretty high of U.S. kids, 17, 18-year-old, that went over and fought and didn't come back. Well, they came back, but they came back in a box rather than alive. And it's not just them and their loss, but also the families and the other brothers and sisters of those kids that I knew in my neighborhood that they no longer had a brother or sister that they knew and loved to play with anymore. And so to tell the story about Memorial Day for me as a kid, the town I lived in, we celebrated with a parade each year. And this was back in 1970, 1971, too, when they started having Memorial Day on Mondays, and they started giving everybody the day off. And so it was a pretty big thing to all of a sudden have a day off on a Monday. And so people thought of it as like the non-traditional or the traditional start to summer. And there'd be cookouts and barbecues and a lot of celebration. But a lot of people would forget the reason for the day. And the reason for the day, again, was remembrance, and remembering the sacrifices those families and those kids made that went to war and didn't come back. I believe the origins of Memorial Day started with the Civil War, with soldiers that, again, gave their all and died during fighting for our country. And, of course, World War I and World War II, and then other conflicts, certainly Korean War and, again, the Vietnam War. But the town I lived in had a parade. And each year the parade, the fire trucks would come out and the police cars and a lot of hoopla. But there was always a group of men or veterans that would march in the parade. And I always remember as a little kid, I'd ride my bike around the parade, buzzing in between the people marching. And I always remember those guys marching tall. And the way they stood up tall and had honor is the word. And the parade would end. But these guys that were veterans would continue to march, and they used to march from the center of town down to the cemetery. And being a kid on a bike, of course, I was curious what's going on. Why are they going down to the cemetery? And I remember following them on my bike, and I'm probably going to cry when I mention this, but they get down to the cemetery, and they didn't just drive their cars, they marched the entire way. And these guys were doing it out of respect for those guys that died. And because we could have been one too as veterans, we know that when we signed up to join, that it could have been us that came home in the box as well. And so these guys would march down to the cemetery, and down at the cemetery it was a solemn event. It wasn't parade. They weren't doing it for show. They were doing it to respect those guys and women. And so they would do a 21 gun salute, and that was always, for me as a kid, hearing those guns shot was kind of cool to hear the guns go off. But then after they did the speech and the guns, there was something that would happen that's truly moved me, which was they would blow taps. And as a kid hearing taps, I was only a little kid, but I remember wanting to stand up and salute. And you'd hear taps blow, and then off at one of the other cemeteries in town, you'd hear taps again. And there was a movement inside. Certainly my heart felt it, and I can still feel it today. I didn't want to do an interview and have to cry, but Memorial Day should stir up emotions, some gratitude, some remembrance, and being grateful for those people that gave their lives for our country. And there's a lot of quotes I looked up to try to say something intelligent, and I think the only one I can remember is that freedom is not free, that these guys paid a pretty hefty price for us to be able to have our phones and have our lives the way they are, and our cookouts on Monday. And just try to remember that it's not about only partying, it's about respecting and being grateful for what we have, and for the guys that paid the price for that.
Why I'm happy to be an American. I'm happy to be an American because it means I am able to take for granted every day what so many other people across the world cannot. I'm not ashamed to say this, although it is wrong, because the comforts and freedoms which I have been able to live with my whole life has conditioned me this way. However, do not allow me to be misunderstood. It is nearly vital to take time, especially on days such as this one, to think introspectively about these blessings and how they've come to be. Nearly 415 years ago, the first settlers made their dangerous voyage across the Atlantic Ocean to escape religious persecutions, and upon those brave settlers grew an extensive community of people united under the same dreams and ideologies. From these people came our forefathers, those who put into words and signed upon paper the freedoms under which we live today as Americans following their separation from England. These people were those who dedicated their lives valiantly to the struggle for freedom, beneath the hope that they, as well as all other future Americans, would someday be able to bask in it. Much like any great nation, it must be prepared to protect the values and virtues its foundations were built upon, and America has shown no lack in those willing to undertake this job. Standing among me are just a few of the millions who took this hefty job with pride and courage. Some who have offered up the greatest sacrifice any living and breathing person could ever know, and seen what can be or is lost in the literal and metaphorical battle to keep all of us on our home soil, taking our freedoms for granted. Today, we remember especially those who gave the ultimate sacrifice to protect our democracy and cannot share in the fruits of their labor as we can. Today, let us not take for granted these sacrifices, as it has in turn allowed us every day to feel safe within our borders, given us the opportunity to make of our lives whatever we see fit, and furthermore placed us on the pedestal as a nation leading in technological advancement, education, and military prowess. Today, I am happy to be an American because it is the home of the free and the home of the brave.
Thank you, everybody, for your time and attention today. I hope that you'll take the messages that you heard and take those with you Monday in your own remembrance and honoring of those who have given their lives in service to our country. Be safe and have a great Memorial Day weekend. Thank you, everybody.